innovations that shift competitive advantages are the following. 1, new technologies. 2, new or shifting buyers' needs. 3, the emergence of a new industry segment. 4, shifting input costs or availability. 5, changes in government regulations. Such techniques described are successfully employed by Japanese automakers and American commercial aircraft manufacturers, such as McDonnell Douglas. With the latter, I spent a 4-year period working as a consultant to their countertrade and offset program in the countries of Finland, Yugoslavia, Hungary, and Austria. For decades, Boeing has rigorously implemented a classic international strategy, successfully exporting jetliners from its 2 factories near Seattle, Washington, in the northwestern United States to the rest of the world. More than half the jetliners that have ever been built are from Boeing. Specifications for jetliners are universal. They require virtually no tailoring to local markets. And because the cost of entering the industry are so high, foreign countries lacking their own aerospace companies have never erected special barriers to the import of commercial aircraft. Building on the security of its enormous American market and enjoying the huge economies of scale that went with dominating the world market for jetliners, Boeing had little incentive until recently to do other than it did, build more airliners faster and at a lower cost than its chief rival, McDonnell Douglas, and export them to the world. Multinational companies, in contrast, are primarily interested in attracting customers to their high value-added products by developing a competitive response to local market conditions. Global food companies such as Nestle have traditionally pursued multinational strategies primarily because food preferences are decidedly local. Historically, such companies have been willing to sacrifice the advantages of global scale by locating as many elements of the value-added chain as are necessary in foreign countries to satisfy local tastes and to market their products. Nestle, for example, operates nearly 400 factories on 5 continents and does 98% of its business outside its home country of Switzerland. Unilever, another company that is highly responsive to local tastes, makes more than 200 different formulations of margarine in highly segmented markets around the world. What such companies lack in efficiencies of global scale in manufacturing, they make up in their well-honed responsiveness in thousands of local markets. Each of these 2 familiar strategies embraces half the global-local equation, the international emphasizing global scale and the multinational emphasizing local response. But neither strategy brings them together and fuses them in a seamless and multidimensional competitive approach. Transnational strategies seek to blend into a synchronous whole the concept of global scale efficiencies and market responsiveness. It is not a simple matter of allocating some resources globally and others locally, but of leveraging the interrelationships across the 2 axes of transnational operation while focusing managerial attention on those distinctive skills or core competencies, as they are labeled in the business journals, that are needed to gain and sustain a competitive advantage. Thus, the 3 essential elements of such a strategy are lines of business, number 1, number 2, customer-oriented business unit relationships, and thirdly, the corporate-driven coordination and exploitation of the core competencies. Now let's briefly address customer-oriented business unit relationships. These relationships are usually coordinated on a local scale. They include coordinated sales activities for common customers, coordinated advertising purchases, the use of a common corporate identity to relate one line of business to another in the customer's mind, and the coordinated use of common logistics such as distribution centers, transportation suppliers, joint billing, and receivables management. The corporate-driven coordination and exploitation of core competencies is carried out on a global scale. Core competencies are the business functions and technologies that are essential to the competitive survival of the enterprise. They are often embodied in research and development and manufacturing organizations, but can also include financial functions, personnel, information technology, and other functions. Invariably, core competencies are represented in the primary products and services that are delivered to customers. Often, they describe essential strategic elements that differentiate the corporation from its competitors. Leveraging these global and local interrelationships means thinking not just in two strategic dimensions, but in three. Lines of business represent scale, core competencies, skills, and global presence scope. I would now briefly review the popular and quite efficient management approach called TQM, or Total Quality Management, and how it can assist a company to become more competitive regionally and internationally. Bill Creech, in his book, The 5 Pillars of TQM, states that a TQM program must meet 4 criteria if it is to succeed. First, it must be based on a quality mindset and quality orientation in all activities at all times, including in every process and product. Second, it must be strongly humanistic to bring quality to the way its employees are included, treated, and inspired. Thirdly, it must be based on a decentralized approach that provides empowerment at all levels, especially at the front line, so that enthusiastic involvement and common purpose are realities, not slogans. Fourth, TQM must be applied holistically and with a systems approach so that its principles, policies, and practices reach every corner of the organization. In short, the TQM approach must shape all parts of the management system, structure, and style, not some pieces in some ways. TQM is, in a way, being used by the Japanese, and successfully. They didn't invent TQM, but they are very good at it. The 5 pillars of TQM are product, process, organization, leadership, and commitment, as shown in this illustration. Product is the focal point for organization, purpose, and achievement. Quality in the product is impossible without quality in the process. Quality in the process is impossible without the right organization. The right organization is meaningless without the proper leadership. Strong bottom-up commitment is the support pillar for all the rest. Each pillar depends upon the other 4, and if one is weak, all are. All companies need to improve their competitive edge. Traditional management approaches are major culprits in growing problems within organizations. These problems are steadily increasing as globalization unfolds. That need not be the case. The globalization age offers even greater, not less, opportunity for national success and well-being and for the success of the international corporation. One result of globalization is the exposure of management inadequacies that have long lain hidden. They were not easy to identify because local comparisons colored by identical cultural influences have been insufficient to reveal them for what they are. They are the products of a management culture that developed in older, less complex times. Those times of comparative economic isolation and insulation featured advantages of special industrial know-how that have now evaporated, and absence of strong outside competition to force introspection and change. Those days are over everywhere, and over dramatically and completely in America as anywhere. America and other countries are not faring well in the glare of these new circumstances and new comparisons. Finally, I have only a small amount of time to mention the International Business Plan. Its importance is immeasurable, not only as a way of identifying and introducing your company, its products and services to others, including potential joint venture partners, but as a tool to help you take the correct steps in becoming an extended organization, ready to address foreign markets. I only have time to stress the 7 most important ingredients of an international business plan. They are: 1, the executive summary; 2, business description; 3, international market analysis; 4, the management team; 5, operations; 6, critical risks; and 7, the financial projections. Perhaps we can explore this important matter in more depth at another time together. I would pose these questions. Why do some companies based in some nations innovate more than others? Why do some nations provide an environment that enables companies to improve and innovate faster than their foreign rivals? In the past, most intelligence or market research has been focused on studying what customers like among available products. The most important question for today's organization, however, is what products or services will be required in the future. Today's companies must work towards satisfying those needs. Few companies have a true global customer. That is, a description by age, income, need, or other indicators that are homogeneous throughout the world. There are some global customers, such as cola drinkers, chocolate candy eaters, and those who enjoy McDonald's hamburgers. But most customers are like beer drinkers. They differ from country to country. Tastes, spendable income, and cultural preferences vary. Therefore, customer mapping is an important part of the strategic process. The major elements of customer mapping or charting are: first, total sales volume; secondly, potential for globalization; thirdly, degree of localization; fourth, cultures and values. As a result of improved communications and the impact of television, movies, and travel, customer tastes and requirements are converging. In summary, it is not necessary to have a global customer to be a global business, but the customer's need remains the most important element in your strategy formulation. Needs vary according to culture and many other factors, and your sensitivity to these factors will be the key to future needs. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz, for that presentation. Let's begin the first question and answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call, and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone number or fax number which now appears on your screen. We remind you to make your phone calls at a bit of a distance from the monitor to avoid feedback. Let's begin our question and answer session with a fax from Felnalco in Medellin, Colombia. And I believe this fax question, perhaps, George, you could respond to. Why do you stress so strongly the joint venture as the most feasible or advisable form of international business cooperation?
Well, I think the joint venture form of doing business is the preferable mechanism to use, because you bring the strengths of more than one entity into play in the execution of the business that's at hand. In my view, joining strengths is much better than trying to go it alone when you have groups with different capabilities and different resources that together would be much stronger than they would be if they were working individually.
Okay. Pat, anything to add to that?
Well, I think I agree with George. Joint ventures are much better done within the framework of companies coming together, and there being a lot of due diligence in preparing one for companies coming together.
Okay, excellent. Now we have a live call from Instituto Tecnológico de Orizaba. Go ahead, please.
Within the NAFTA agreement, could you explain the term of dumping with respect of the to the cost of sale price and the production cost?
The concept of dumping.
Dumping is a concept that includes the sale of a product into a country at an unrealistically low price, a price that's either subsidized by the government of the country from which it's being sent, or a cost that is actually less than production to compete unfairly in the country to which it's being sent in order to capture a market. And most countries have laws against that practice because it's considered to be an unfair trade practice.
Okay. We have a call now from Lima, Peru, Instituto Nacional de Investigación y Capacitación de Telecomunicaciones. Go ahead, please.
In countries such as countries of Latin America, you usually hear that the markets are being opened to the globalization, but the leaders' minds have not opened to that. What do you think should happen with the personal attitude of the leaders vis-a-vis this new globalization movement?
Well, I'd like to address that as I did in my previous segment. I would like to think that the leaders of countries throughout the world would realize that their role is really to look to the welfare of their people rather than to the businesses that take place within their country that wish to expand multinationally. Government intervention in business can only curtail business and only can hurt trade and hurt the relationships between countries.
I'd like to add, I agree with Stan completely. In a discussion that we had in Colombia last year at a seminar that I participated in, the same topic came up. And the conclusion of the group was that companies have to take action. Private companies shouldn't depend on their governments and bureaucracies to pave the way for them. A company should take the initiative, use the tools that are available, join forces with other companies in other countries in which they wish to engage in business, and go forward with it. Don't wait for your government to assist you to do it. And in some places it's inevitable that governments will put into place obstacles for your success, but companies have to take the initiative and move forward, or else it won't happen.
Okay. We now have a call from UNAM in Coacalco, Mexico. Please go ahead.
From Mexico, how can the risk decrease, the risk of making a large investment in order to satisfy a foreign market, and when the foreign partner does not really work on the marketing part of the business?
So we're asking about the risk factor for, let's say, a partner in Mexico who is taking care of the marketing and the domestic scene, and how should these sorts of joint ventures work? Can you respond, Pat?
I'm not exactly sure of the intent of the caller on this question. Let me attempt to. If the question relates to how do I determine the risk factors in regards to a a company, a particular company in Mexico, it is not difficult to evaluate through banking sources, through credit sources, through governmental organizations, through private companies, the creditworthiness of a company. It is not difficult to evaluate the ability of that company to proceed and to act in a professional manner and to successfully conclude the goals of a joint venture party. So I think, again, this refers to a comment I had made earlier about due diligence. I think it is very important for a company entertaining a relationship to spend some time working with other people and organizations, consultants included, to determine the value of that particular relationship that they're being asked to look at.
Yes, I think this illustrates the point that a good deal of work has to be done up front, if you will, in the beginning, to establish what the arrangements are, who is doing what, who takes care of marketing, what the finance is going to be, etc. And those things should be well established before a joint venture is entered into, I think.
I'd like to add that there are mechanisms that you can include in the legal documents that are used to implement the joint venture, such as bonds, insurance. One of the best mechanisms to ensure that the marketing plan or that the marketing efforts of your joint venture partner are being implemented and are effective is to have a mechanism for performance review of that joint venture partner's efforts included in the as part of the contract conditions, and also a periodic review that would allow you to terminate the relationship in the event that that joint venture partner is not acting effectively or not living up to its commitments under the agreement.
Exactly.
There's also a variety of insurance products that are available to
minimize the risk.
Or to mitigate, as we refer to in the industry, to pass that risk on to a third party that may be willing to accept for a premium, a fee, that risk factor. And that does assist a company in protecting its valuable assets, its balance sheets, and the downside risk of something going very badly wrong in this relationship.
Right.
One more thing that I'd like to add that I think is important, and it's at the front of my mind right now because of a matter I'm working with currently, and that is that a foreign company coming into the U.S. or a U.S. company going abroad should sign contracts individually in its own name so that it's got a direct relationship with the other side, such as in a lease arrangement for office and warehouse space. Don't rely on an individual in the other country to sign that contract for you without your having a direct relationship with the landlord. Because if you run into a problem and that individual decides that he's going to take control, he's got control.
Excellent. Excellent point. Let's move along now. We have a call from Comisión Federal de Electricidad in Distrito Federal in Mexico. Go ahead, please.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Si la integración global...
If global integration means to create more richness or more wealth, why is it that the results have been more unemployment, more poverty, delinquency, crime, and more poor people? Don't you think this is leading us to the apocalypse?
Gracias.
Thank you.
That's a very difficult question, but I hope perhaps Stan can...
I do not believe that we are going to the abyss or the apocalypse. There will always be problems connected with any type of business relationship involving a partnership or involving moving into another region. But generally, I think that the plus side is that this is the only way that companies can expand and produce products and distribute products internationally in a world that is getting smaller and smaller every minute. And now with the internet and other methods of marketing and distribution, we have to, of course, overcome malpractices and look to enrich both sides in a relationship.
I think that's probably about as good as we can do with that question. It's a difficult question. I might point out that even in the United States, there is a gap, a widening gap between the rich class and the poorer class. And I think one of the challenges and positive aspects of globalization is that this gap will hopefully start to narrow in all countries. Let's move ahead with a call from Universidad Tecnológica de Panamá. Good morning.
Sí, buenos días.
Good morning.
Tomando en cuenta que los países
Taking into account that Latin American countries are united by their language and other concepts that are rather regional concepts. Amongst these, we have a great lack of confidence in the regional and international agreements within the international organizations. First of all, we need to see how these countries could overcome this lack of confidence, lack of trust. And maybe through the OMC we could find some kind of balance for the developing countries like those in Latin America, for example, so that they may be able to compete, although not symmetrically, but maybe find some more equity and more just or a greater balance in their participation.
That's a very good point, and I think that the asymmetries between the countries of Latin America and, for example, the United States and Canada in terms of NAFTA are very important for us to understand so that we can overcome them. So this matter of trust and credibility, I think, is really at the heart of a good track record or experience with alliances such as joint ventures. But in terms of the specific question of credibility and how do you see this issue? How does one manufacture the credibility?
Frank,
I'm sorry.
if I may ask a question here, I'm not getting the question.
Okay.
Could you repeat?
The issue is what are some ways in which a stronger credibility and trust factor can be generated as we try to develop our international business?
My comment is that, in response to that question, is that a track record of experience will lead to confidence and credibility. And I think that what is happening is that if you have a small country that is trying to compete with a large country, that the small country's possibility of to compete more strongly is strengthened by uniting with other countries to enlarge the size of the market so that those markets become attractive to companies from the larger country. Mm-hmm. That's why you have these regional trade agreements between many countries that are being negotiated. The Central American countries are joining together because there's strength in numbers.
Exactly.
And once there is some experience in testing those agreements for their workability and for their reliability, then there'll be more confidence among the member countries and the companies that come from those countries in the effectiveness and credibility of those agreements.
Okay, thanks, George. Let's move ahead with a call now from Instituto Tecnológico de Tepic. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. The question is the following. What happens with the preferences and desires and more than needs when you're going for marketing? Do you think that you exploit more the first ones in order to impact the market more? What elements do you think are being more exploited when you do marketing?
You mean in terms of a first step, first stage of joint venturing and so forth? Well, let me try to see if I can capture the essence of that question. I think we're talking about the entry into the market and how that should go in terms of making something happen. in a joint venture?
Going back to what George alluded to previously, due diligence is the first thing that I feel has to take place, including after you identify your future associates, your potential associates, and we're speaking of a joint venture again here. You also have to consider market research, test marketing of your products to see how they will be accepted. Even McDonald's, with all their tremendous resources, found that when they entered Russia and opened the first McDonald's hamburgers in Moscow, that suddenly they realized that beside hamburgers they had to serve pierogi, one of the Russian dishes. So careful market research and careful test marketing before you plunge entirely into the venture.
Okay, very good. We have a call now from Brazil. Go ahead, please. Brazil?
Bueno.
Bueno.
Hello?
Sí, mi pregunta es la siguiente.
My question is the following.